Hello everyone, Nathan here with PixelPipes, and we're trying something a little different today with the Fragment videos, at least for this one, and we'll see how it goes. This is something that is very much directly inspired by Adrian's Digital Basement and how he has his multi-camera setup. So we have a above camera, hey, and we'll just kind of switch between them as we go along. And yeah, so what I want to do for this video is kind of like a mini card battles video. I thought this might be an interesting comparison, but not enough to do like a full production, like researched, scripted everything. Just you know, take a look at a couple of cards that I find interesting, but are not necessarily historic or anything like that. So the two cards that we're going to take a look at here are the Radeon X800 and the GeForce 6800. These two cards were priced at $200. They came out in well, almost 2005, but we'll get to that in just a second as we kind of do a summary of each card here. Obviously both PCI Express, and they were pretty much direct competitors. So let's start with looking at the cards individually. We'll kind of go over some of the specs and everything here. So as I said, this one is the Radeon X800, and it is a mainstream card, but it's based on sort of a high-end GPU. It's based on the R430 core. So this was a core that ATI released the very tail end of 2004, which is full 16 pipes, 6 vertex processors. It has essentially the same core configuration as the bigger X800 cards, but built on 110 nanometer process, so it's smaller, and it's not using the high K dielectric process either that the faster cards were using. So it doesn't clock as high. It's not designed to clock as high. It's designed to be a lower power version, and this was to hit a price target. With a very competitive landscape that was around during the period of 2004-2005 between ATI and NVIDIA. Both companies were sort of at each other's throats, and for consumers it was great because they were scaling performance from, you know, closer to higher end levels down in price further and further. And this is one example of this here, but this one is a cut down R430. So the number of pixel pipes was 12, but the number of TMUs and ROPs was also 12, and they kept the same number of vertex processors to 6, just like the higher end cards. All the X800 base cards had 6 vertex processors, and even the mainstream cards, the X700 and so on, also did that. So they never changed the number of vertex shaders, which was kind of a nice bonus with the ATI camp at that time. You had a core clock of 392 megahertz, so again, not reaching high-end levels there. And you had a memory clock of 700 megahertz, and this was just using standard BGA DDR1. Now for the NVIDIA camp, you had the GeForce 6800, again around $200, and this came out in I believe late 2004, if not early 2005. I may have to add text on the screen if I got that wrong. But this one is again PCI Express. So you had native PCI Express this time, which was not the case for the 6800 GT, 6800 Ultra, anything derived off of the NV45 GPU. They used an internal bridge chip. So if you actually look at the die of the NV45, it's the same substrate as NV40, but it has the bridge chip embedded on the package. So it kind of hides the fact that it's not native PCI Express. It was a native AGP adapted to PCI Express, but that's not the case for this one. What they did is they went ahead and created a new GPU just for this product called NV41, and this was not only native PCI Express, but it had less PixelPipes than the higher end versions. So you had 12 built into the chip, and there weren't any more that you could unlock. There wasn't anything, any added performance to be had. It was just 12 pipes, and this saved on transistors. This initial one was built on 130 nanometer process, so versus 110 of the NV or the R430. So this one was a smaller die than NV40, but they didn't actually use a smaller manufacturing process to do that. Now, it does have 12 TMUs. However, the ROP count is reduced to 8, and I'm not sure why that is. You know, for whatever reason, I guess they decided it didn't need a full 12 ROPs, but this is decidedly an advantage for the X800, which has more ROPs. So as resolutions go up, or if you use anti-aliasing, that higher fill rate will go into the advantage of the Radeon X800. The Vertex processors were reduced from 6 to 5, so NVIDIA did play around with the number of Vertex processors in their products. So the mainstream ones like the 6600 actually only had 3 Vertex processors, and even the AGP version of this GeForce 6800, which was based on NV40, it had a couple of advantages in that it had the full 12 across the board PixelPipes, TMUs, and ROPs, but NVIDIA did disable one of the Vertex processors, which is something that their architecture was able to do. Now for the core clock, it comes in at just 325 megahertz. Again, a disadvantage compared to the R430 based Radeon X800. So while the GeForce 6 architecture was pretty efficient per clock, it wasn't enough. It wasn't like such a difference that they could get away with a drastically lower core clock. And if you look at my previous card battles video with the X800 XT Platinum Edition versus the 6800 Ultra, again, there was a clock disparity there, an even larger one, and that just simply worked in the favor of the X800 XT. It was just simply faster all around, especially with newer drivers. The memory is clocked at 600 megahertz. And one interesting thing to note here, again, compared to the AGP version of the 6800 based on the NV40, is that the core clock was the same between the two, but the memory was actually clocked slower on the PCI Express version. It was 700 megahertz on the NV40 based AGP version. And this is, again, just like the X800, this is using DDR1 BGA memory. On my particular example, I went ahead and put the Lead Tech cooler on here. This is not actually technically a Lead Tech card. It has the standard kind of rectangular cooler. If I have an image, I'll flash that on the screen. This one's a nicer cooler. It extends just a little bit beyond the slot, but it's quiet, it's a much larger fan, and sort of the radial fin design here just does a better job at dissipating heat. So I decided to use this one, and this actually came off of a 6800 that I had back in the day. I had it briefly. I accidentally killed it when I was trying to volt mod it because I was crazy into overclocking back then. But I don't have that dead card anymore, but I took the cooler off and I saved it all these years. And then many years later, after I started the channel, I got just a inexpensively priced 6800 to put this cooler on it. And these can be found very inexpensively. These were popular among OEM system builders. And so now if you're looking for, you know, a 6800 class card, I mean, it's not going to have the performance of, you know, the GT or etc. or even the GS. It is very inexpensive. Both of these cards have a full 256-bit memory interface. So there's no drastic difference in terms of memory bandwidth other than being 100 megahertz higher on the X800. Oh, and one other important thing I want to note here is that there is a memory size difference between these as well. This card actually only has 128 megs versus 256 megs on this one. I think the GPU horsepower will matter much more in the end, and I don't think too many or probably none of my tests are really going to have a performance hit from just having 128 megs on the X800. But it is noteworthy they don't have the same size memory. 128 megs is the original version of this card as it came out, as it was first introduced. It is the most common one. I am pretty sure there's 256 meg versions out there. I just don't have one for this comparison. This is the one that I have, the original one. And the 6800 PCI Express version anyway was largely only really available with 256 megs. There may have been some more obscure ones from add-in board partners that had less RAM, but especially the OEM version, the most common one that you'll find, has 256. So just a little side note there. So I'm just going to go ahead and put these cards in my test machine and run some benchmarks, and I'll just kind of go through the graphs and discuss it. I don't expect it really to be a close match, to be honest with you. I think just the X800 architecture was just faster in general, and I do expect it to win, so no real upsets, I don't think. But just from preliminary tests anyway that I've looked at. But we'll do a little bit more in-depth testing and talk about it. So let's cut to that. And we're back with the results. Let's just go ahead and jump right into them. So we got quite a few tests to go through. First one is 3D Mark 2001 SE. As you see, they score pretty closely. It's pretty CPU limited and not a whole lot of shaders being exercised there. Moving on to 3D Mark 03, we do have a lot more shaders being exercised, especially in the Mother Nature test. And the 6800 scores actually surprisingly low. This was I reran the test, but it scored exactly the same, quite a bit lower than the AGP version, actually. So not sure what's up with that. And then going into 3D Mark 05, which heavily uses shaders, this is more like what I would expect. And of course, the Radeon X800 just seems to be quite a bit faster in, shader intensive tests, and this bears that out. Going on to 3D Mark 06. Of course, the Radeon X800 does not support shader model 3.0, so we don't have any results for that, and there is a score penalty as a result. But shockingly, the shader model 2.0 test is dramatically lower than the 6800, and I wouldn't have expected that, except I discovered that unfortunately 3D Mark 06 really demands 256 megs of memory. If you have 128, you get quite a performance penalty, and that's what's happening here. So as much as I was trying not to test the VRAM capacity, unfortunately there is a test here that does show a difference, and we'll see that again in the very next one, Call of Duty. This is a pretty bad showing for the Radeon X800. I maxed out the resolution at 1600 by 1200 and cranked up the AA and AF to really exercise these chips. I mean, as far as the GPU goes, that should be a cakewalk. This is a Quake 3 engine game, id Tech 3 game, and shouldn't be a problem. But apparently we have gone well past 128 megs of VRAM, and there was just really bad segments of lag that just killed the frame rate. Matter of fact, let me just pull up the Excel sheet, and I can show you here real quick. We zoom in here. So these are all the tests that I ran. I ran at multiple resolutions just to try and see if I could get under that VRAM capacity limit. And these are running at 1024 by 768, which is a pretty low resolution, honestly. And for a id Tech 3 game from 2003, should be nothing. And it is 70 frames per second for the X800, but it is just still far under the 6800 here. And the 6800 is butting up against the frame rate limit of the engine. And at 1280 by 1024, again, the 6800 is at the engine limit frame rate wise, whereas the X800 drops significantly. And at all resolutions, I noticed the slowdowns, so I was pretty disappointed by that. So I just picked 1600 by 1200 for the graph, but here's more data, from the test I ran just to show you. So yeah, interesting. Going on to Unreal Tournament 2004. I don't know if it's a difference with Direct 3D versus OpenGL, like the last test was using, but in this Direct 3D test, we don't have that VRAM issue. Again, maxed out 1600 by 1200, cranked up AA and AF, and we do see a marginally better frame rate with the X800, but this is not a game that has any shader effects in it. So we're looking at an extremely close frame rate between the two, with a slight edge for the X800, but both pulling out pretty playable frame rates overall. And then we have Halo, which historically favors ATI architectures, and indeed that shows here as well. Pretty good advantage for the X800. Half-Life 2, again, same story. ATI favored engine, and fairly sizable increase in frame rate there, although they're both really smooth. You wouldn't have any problems playing it at this game, at this frame rate with these settings, 1280 by 1024, so I didn't quite max out the res for this one, but I probably could have. And then we have Doom 3, again 1280 by 1024, both of them turning out not great frame rates. You'd probably want to lower the resolution or turn off AA to actually play the game, and the 6800 does have an advantage. It typically is a NVIDIA favored game, although I noticed with Catalyst 10 2, which I used for this test, ATI cards do perform extremely well. And if you go back to the card battles video for the X800 XT Platinum Edition versus the 6800 Ultra, the X800 wins in Doom 3. So this might actually be an issue with the VRAM again, but neither card really turns out a great frame rate anyway. Probably should have tested more resolutions for that, but that's okay. Then we have Fear, maxed out again, not a very playable frame rate, but they both turn out exactly the same frame rate, which was a surprise for me. And then we did try Crisis at low settings at 1024 by 768. Actually pretty reasonable frame rates from both cards, but as you can see, the X800 has a pretty huge lead with this game. I mean, more advanced shaders. I mean, it's low settings are not very not too crazy with the shader effects, and it's quite the sacrifice in terms of image quality, but it is shader model 2.0 friendly, and the X800 does pretty well there. And then averaging out the 7 games, well, interestingly, the 6800 wins by a margin, and that's simply because I did not expect that my test would actually show a hindrance for the X800 with the 128 megs of memory. I'm kind of annoyed that I ended up testing the VRAM just as much as the GPU themselves, but I mean, benchmarking is a learning process. Behind the scenes working on this channel, I'm always running into situations like this where if I want to test certain aspects, I have to choose wisely what tests I run and which cards I choose. I do wish I had a 256 meg Radeon X800 for this test, or I mean I could have chosen the AGP version of the 6800, which also has 128 megs. And actually has the same ROP count as we discussed earlier, but I did not test that for this video. That was not what the comparison was about. These two were pitted against each other directly in the market at the same price point at the same time, so it just made sense to me to put them against each other. So yeah, that's really all there is to it. Again, if you're interested, I mean, you can check out the 6800 Ultra versus Radeon X800 XT Platinum Edition card battles video, the first card battles video ever made, complete with shaky camera work. You know, early days. When did I make this video? 5 years ago. Holy cow, can't believe it's been that long. Anyway, that goes in depth into the differences in the architectures and why the R300 through up to the R500 based architectures have a shader advantage. It goes in depth into that over the GeForce 6 series. So definitely check that out if you're interested in the nitty-gritty technical side of things. But that will be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you caught my SIS 315 video that I posted just before this. If you haven't yet, do check that out. It's pretty it's an interesting card for sure. Definitely something a little outside the norm for this channel. But until then, take care and we'll see you next time.